Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our kickoff for our advising professional development series that will take place throughout the spring semester. It is so nice to see a list of so many familiar faces. I thank you all for joining us today for the next 3 hours as we really take kind of a funnel approach to looking at Corequisite. We'll take a broad overview with our friends at Student Ready Strategies, then going a little bit more into the NSHE details, and then you'll hear from the resident experts, Nevada's resident experts, your NSHE advising leads. So before we get started, I do want to thank our funders who have made this opportunity possible. The Strong Start to Finish and the ECMC Foundation have both generously supported Nevada's implementation of Corequisite. I think we can all agree that COVID has provided the opportunity to derail a lot of the good work that is happening. And without these generous funders, we certainly would not be on track to implement this important reform that closes achievement gaps and improves success for our historically underrepresented students. I also want to thank our friends and colleagues at Student Ready Strategies who will give you a beautiful presentation this morning. Sarah, Vanessa, and Kate, thank you very much for being here. And I do want to thank the NSHE Corequisite Implementation Task Force as well. A number of advising leads, of which have been working tirelessly over the past year, are on this call, and you will hear from them later. And you have a number of math and English faculty, as well as administrative representatives that have also been working tirelessly, and we will share their information a little bit later on so that you can reach out to them if you have specific questions to your institution. With that, I will pass it off to Student Ready Strategies founder and CEO, Sarah Ansell.
Well, hello, good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. We're so excited to be partnering with NSHE and with all of you on this really important work for student success. To kick off today, I just want to talk a little bit about who we are and what we're all about. Then I'll take us on quite a bit of a tangent for a moment, and then we'll bring it back to teeing up what we're here to talk about today, which is Corequisite Support and developmental education reform in general. So let me introduce you to my team. As Thea said, thank you. I'm Sarah Ansell. I'm joined today by Vanessa Cadle, our Senior Vice President, as well as Kate Valter, our Vice President of Marketing and Communications. So with our name Student Ready Strategies, we often get the question of what does that mean to be student ready? So for us, it's really rooted in a core belief, which is that every student can succeed. So if students aren't succeeding, it means that we need to do more on our end to do our work differently to ensure that they do. So for us, it's not an initiative, it's a mindset. Our vision is a world in which everyone feels that way and believes in that core belief and is actively involved in evolving their systems and their structures to ensure that students do succeed. We believe that the unit of change of this work truly is our colleges and universities. So nobody graduates from Student Ready Strategies. Nobody graduates from NSHE. They graduate from your institutions. So the work truly needs to happen there. But there's an entire network and support infrastructure of people that we work with that includes nonprofit organizations, foundations, system offices like NSHE, and other collaboratives. And we are so fortunate to be able to work across all these kinds of organizations and really in this network of folks who are like-minded and who root themselves in that core belief that every student can succeed. So this is our network of folks. And if you ever wonder about our logo, which I'm sure you haven't, but the connectedness in our logo is meant to signal that connectedness of this network of folks who are all working toward that student-ready world. So I told you I'll take you on a tangent. So I'm going to tell you a story, and then we're going to do a couple quiz questions. And this is, I know it's Friday morning, so we're going to try to get your brain juices flowing and get your energy up and get you engaged in this presentation. So the story I want to tell you starts back a couple decades when I was at that stage in my life when you do what my younger friends now call adulting. So I was thinking of what are these grown-up things that I need to be doing and experimenting with different things. And during that time frame, I decided it was really important that I stop eating fast food and I'm going to become a gourmet chef. So I watched the Food Network for about a month. And after that, I became convinced that the only thing holding me back from being a gourmet chef, apart from any formal culinary training whatsoever, was the fact that I did not have fresh herbs at my house. So I set out to create an herb garden. I had a new house, I had a new yard. I don't know a lot about gardening, but what I do know is I don't like shoveling. So I went into my backyard and I looked around and I said, okay, there's a spot back there that grass is not growing, which means I don't have to shovel. That's where I'm going to plant my herbs. So I went to Walmart, got some seeds, put them in the ground. They didn't grow. I blamed Walmart. I blamed the seeds. So I went to a fancy nursery, bought more expensive seeds, put those in the ground, still didn't grow. And then I went and blamed the fact that it was seeds to begin with. That was the problem. So I went and got live plants, put them in the ground, and they died. So I'm going to ask you to engage in the chat for a moment. And those of you who are better at gardening than me, tell me what I did wrong. You won't hurt my feelings. All right. Yep, you're all smarter than me, or at least me. You're smarter than me 20 years ago, certainly. So most of you are saying the problem was the soil. It wasn't quality soil, it wasn't fertilized, didn't have enough water. And you're exactly right. And the reason you know that without having to do any real digging is because our human brains instinctively understand that the product of a system has everything to do with the system itself. So I'm going to go through a couple more quiz questions. Again, keep using the chat, answer these questions. I want to kind of drive this point home about the difference between the inputs in the system and the system itself. So quiz question number 1. Would you take your dog to a dog park that was not fenced? And if you want to put why you would or wouldn't in the chat, that would be great too. Pretend you have a dog if you don't have a dog. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of the people who are saying no are kind of about safety reasons, about sort of whether or not they would run off, whether there are highways nearby, etc. Quiz question number 2. When your lights go out during a storm, who's responsible for fixing it? A lot of you are putting a lot of faith in your husband to fix electrical problems. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of Nevada Energy, the energy company. Right, so sort of understand that, you know, the idea is that this is a system that has gone down or that's failing, right? If you want to go to the next question, this is the 3rd one. If there are dozens of fish floating belly up in a pond, what do you think caused it? 2020. Probably. All right, so we've got poison, pollution, bad chemicals. Again, sort of, no, dynamite. I like that answer. Could have been dynamite. So I think what I'm hoping is that not only have we woken you up and planted some crazy questions about what is Sarah talking about right now, but hopefully you're proving to yourself that you sort of understand this difference between the system and its inputs. So with that pond, the answers were coming fast, but I didn't see anyone say that the fish were unprepared to live in that pond or that they had not adequately prepared themselves to live in that pond. Nobody said that when the lights go out, you change all your light bulbs. And, you know, with the puppy, some of you were comfortable, but I think anyone who was worried about the puppy running away or being safe was clear that, you know, if the puppy ran away, it wouldn't necessarily be the puppy's fault. It would probably be the fact that there wasn't a fence. So with this, I just really want to drive home this idea of the system versus the inputs, because we're going to bring that a lot closer to home as we talk about co-requisite supports today. But I want to leave you with a final thought, and this is an idea that I use all the time in my thinking and when I'm working with our partners, that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. So a fenceless dog park is perfectly designed to let your puppy go out into the highway. And my herb garden was perfectly designed to kill everything I put in it. It wasn't the intention of any of those things, but that was the result. So as we go into the more relevant content for today and why you're actually here, I want to leave you with this idea of that there are all sorts of systems in higher education and in our normal lives. And many of them were intended to do something very different than what they actually do. But the design of that system, intended or not, is that the results indicate what the design is perfectly intended to do. So we're going to talk about a higher education system that was intended to help students succeed in their gateway courses, but in reality was perfectly designed to do something very different. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Vanessa, to walk through the details of that.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Sarah. I absolutely love the energy that I'm seeing in the chat. So I just want to invite all of you to keep using that chat throughout this. If you come up with questions or want to make comments, or you want to put ideas in there about what you're doing at your institutions and what you already know about what I'm talking about, please keep doing that. Kate Valter, Sarah mentioned her earlier, is our VP of Communications and Marketing, and she is going to be monitoring our chat throughout this. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll be prepared at the end to answer all your questions or to bring up some of the discussion points you put in the chat box. And so I didn't introduce myself. My name is Vanessa Cadle, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Senior Vice President at Student Ready Strategies. And I have to say that I am absolutely thrilled. I don't know right now how many of you are on this call, almost 250 advisors from around Nevada. And that's so exciting to me, because I have spent nearly 10 years of my career as a student affairs professional. And one of my favorite groups to talk to is advisors, because I know that you are all spending all of your time student focused, student facing, and you really understand a lot of what I'm about to talk about in sort of a firsthand way. So let's just jump in. I know it's early, and Sarah got to do a sort of a quiz with you, which was really cool. And I get to be the speaker in the morning that gives you some history and some charts and some data. So I promise I'm going to make it interesting, but you are going to see some charts and you are going to hear about some history. So grab whatever mug, breakfast drink that you prefer, whether that be coffee or maybe hot cocoa for the holidays, and just get comfy for the next around 30 minutes. And like I said before, please use the question and answer box or use the chat box to sort of play along as I go through this. So here's the overview of what you can expect from this presentation. I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing the level setting. This presentation this morning is sort of going to be your foundation as you go throughout the rest of your professional development series here for CoRec for Advisors. So I'm going to start talking about why did higher education begin implementing developmental education to begin with? And what does a traditional sequence of remediation actually mean for our students? Then I'm going to transition into talking about the co-requisite approach, provide some examples of different models. I'm going to define it, tell you what's great about it. And then we're going to talk about other states and systems who have implemented co-requisite policy across the country. And then all throughout the presentation, I'm going to provide data, and I'm going to talk about data and evidence about the efficacy of co-requisite reform. But I'm also going to talk about placement, first year math and English, which a lot of you ask about on the registration form, and talk about progression, student progression through developmental education into Gateway Math and English. And then finally, I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on why you, advisors, are absolutely the key to success of the co-requisite approach. And one thing I do want to note before I move on is that throughout the presentation and probably throughout the rest of these professional development experiences, you will hear us using the terms developmental and remedial interchangeably throughout the presentation. They mean the same thing. A long time ago, it was called remediation. It sort of had negative connotations. So the verbiage switched to developmental, but both of them mean the same thing. So I'll be using them both. Okay, so how did we get here? So a lot of you might know this, but I want to give a little bit of a history lesson. The history of higher education tells us that the system was created, the American higher education system was created with one very distinct population of Americans in mind. And that is wealthy Americans, white Americans, and overwhelmingly male Americans. That is who higher education was designed to serve when it was built. And so after World War II, when FDR signed the GI Bill of Rights, and then as we move forward in time and the civil rights era unfolded, more students of color, students from low income backgrounds who may have chose to go to the military instead of enrolling in higher education were coming back. And in the civil rights era, a lot of people of color were enrolling in higher education. And so increasing number of students with varied levels of skills and backgrounds, students who were very much prepared for higher education, but were different from what our institutions were typically seeing. These institutions were accustomed to educating a largely homogenous population with similar academic preparation and a similar background. So, in order to address this, higher education designed the system of remedial or developmental education meant to prepare these students for college level courses. So, what does a traditional model of developmental education look like? This is what they designed. So you already know this, you have this at your institutions. So this is a series of developmental courses. This is sort of like a curricular map of it, right? The purple boxes that you see up there are the developmental courses. And then, you have to take one and then you enroll in the other, and then the other, and then you get to the gateway course. At Student Ready Strategies, we actually worked with Strong Start to Finish and completed over 500 curricular maps for institutions across the country that look similar to this, but they were much more complex, as you can imagine. And some institutions didn't just have 1 or 2 or 3 levels of developmental education. They had as many as 8 levels of remediation. And so that means some students have to take up to 8 courses that are non-credit bearing. They don't count towards graduation, and they add time and significant financial burden to their degree path before a student can even take college math or English. So this is what the system was designed like. So here are the results of that system. And as Sarah discussed earlier, the system was intended to help students get to and through Gateway Math and English. But what it was perfectly designed to do is this. This chart is from one of the most influential and earlier studies on corequisite support, and it was done by Dr. Tristan Denley when he was in Tennessee. This is using the Tennessee community colleges, their Board of Regents, when they started to implement COREC. So this bar you're looking at. This is the percent of students who passed a Gateway Math course in their first year of enrollment. And the bottom line is the Math ACT subscore. So the highest here are 26%. Those who got an 18 were passing at a 26% a Gateway Math course in their first year. So that's only a quarter of students actually making it to and through a Gateway course in their first year. And that is only one of those blue bars. So why is that? This right here, this slide, is the one thing that if you remember anything from this presentation, I want you to take this away. This is one of the most foundational elements to understanding traditional remediation and the corequisite approach. It's not that developmental education instructors are not doing their jobs. As many of you know, some developmental education instructors are the best that we have on our campuses. They're engaged, they understand growth mindset, they know how to get their students to pass these courses, and the students do pass the courses. It's actually the added attrition points in this developmental sequence that are the issue. Every time a student's done with a class and has to re-enroll for next semester, they have a chance to drop out or stop out. And we know if students are presented with an opportunity to do that, they often take it, especially when they don't feel like they're making any progress towards the goal, the reason they're in higher education to begin with. You can imagine right now, especially in this pandemic, all the reasons a student might stop out. They lost their job, they have to take care of an ill child, an ill family member, their students are at home and their students, right, their little ones, are at home and they're helping them with their schoolwork. And all of that is a lot, right? And then you feel like, okay, I have to go 4 more courses before I'm even in a gateway English course. So students are mentally fatigued with this also. They may think, what am I doing here? I'm just toiling away. And so you can see here a visual of that process and why so few students actually make it to that gateway course. It's the attrition points. Remember those arrows when we're losing those students. We started with 9 in English 097, and we got with 2 in that gateway English course. And most importantly, research shows us that once they make it to that English 100 course, they're not any more likely to pass that gateway course because of their time spent in developmental courses. So the system was intended to prepare them for that gateway course, and they're not any more likely to pass it. So yeah, that's the big kicker right there. So I want you to think back to the who developmental education was created for. And you can actually see it clearly here in this chart. Our historically marginalized students across the country are much more likely to be placed into a developmental education course. You can see that Black students, 3.5. This is the number of developmental courses taken in their lifetime at school. So Hispanic students, Asian students, all more than their white peers, right? And there's a lot of strong research out there from the Community College Research Center and the Educational Results Partnership in California. They've completed large-scale studies to understand the impact of placement on student progression and success. And this slide is showing you a few of the major takeaways from the CCRC study, that students, way too many of them, are actually severely underplaced. So students who could be successful in a college level course are being placed into remediation at a really unacceptable rate. And you know, we talked about this earlier. This adds debt, time to degree, all of that to each of these students. And also they don't continue. So, and we've said this, most disheartening, these are often our students of color and actually students attending part-time. And we know that there's many issues with using one test, particularly high stakes standardized tests for placement. Studies out of California show that GPA is a better predictor of student success. And you can see some of the quotes here on the slide. You can think about this. Think about when you were in high school. And this GPA that follows you out of high school was really a measure of your motivations, your academic ability, all of that. And it's over time in different environments. And so GPA really is a really strong predictor of academic success in college. And think about a high stakes test, whether that be the ACT or the SAT, or if you sit down and you have to come into college and you're at orientation and they say, welcome, here, take a test, and we're going to place you into a course. I know that made my heart flutter, and I totally freaked out when I knew I had to do placement tests on my first day of orientation. And I don't think I did my best. And I can't imagine, you know, put yourself in that position. You've probably all been in that position. That's really stressful. And that is what's placing students and determining their future in higher education, right? So let me go back. I know, right, that advisors here in Nevada, Theo, who did our intro, Theo Meek, we talked about this, and I know that Nevada's advisors, you're all really interested in the multiple measures for placement strategy. I can't go into that today. I don't have enough time, but it is an entire strategy that's complementary to what we're talking about today, to eliminating developmental courses and then implementing co-requisite support. And after all, how can students be successful in a gateway course if they can't place into it at all? So this is a very, very important note when you think about how we're placing students. And one more thing I want to bring to your attention about remediation and developmental education. I know that a lot of you think about how we speak to students, what the messaging that we send them. And this is out of a study that we did at Student Ready Strategies. It was actually published. You can go to strongstart.org and see one of our points of interest about this. These are words that show up in developmental course titles and course descriptions. So you see words like basic, low skill, pre-college, elementary. So I want you all to take a second and either think back to when you were in developmental education, someone you know, or some of the students that you talk to, and these are the names of their courses. Can you put in the chat box some ideas about how these words make you feel when thinking these are on your transcript, or these are words that are showing up in the courses that you're taking? Less than, demeaning, not good enough. Pre-college is the best of the worst. That's right. Not college ready. Unintelligent, like you do not belong in college. Inadequate. Facing backward. Redoing high school courses. All of this spot on. Motivation draining, underdeveloped, not enough. Thank you all so much for sharing those with us. That's exactly spot on, the point that we wanted to make. These words contribute to a deficit mindset in our students. And think about what we already talked about. A lot of students in these courses are students of color, adult students, those who already feel like college might not be for them. And then we place them into these courses with these titles and with these words that is sending a very clear message, right? Welcome to college, you're not college ready. So we encourage you to think about this when you go back onto your campus and examine some of your course titles and take a look at what those look like. Our examination of courses from institutions across the country show that this type of language is incredibly pervasive in course titles and descriptions all over. And so this is something at SRS we're really passionate about, and we're really looking to change. And so we wanted to bring it up here with you all today. And so one more reminder. These are the results that traditional developmental education produces. And this is not just in Tennessee. What I didn't want to do this morning is show you 400 charts and have you all sleeping on your computers before 10 o'clock. So I'm going to just show you this one. And this is again from Tennessee. Similar numbers from across the country, everywhere is doing co-requisite reform. And this, the purple bar, these are the results of the co-requisite approach. This triples the percentage of students getting through Gateway Math and English in the first year. Look at those below, even below a 13 ACT math subscore, 2.7% all the way up to 32.9%, just with implementation of the co-requisite approach. This is the number of students, again, getting through Gateway Math in the first year. It's pretty dramatic, right? This is what we know. Co-requisite support is a strategy that has been successful in greatly increasing pass rates in Gateway Math and English. And this isn't just what I showed you, right? I showed you a chart about ACT subscore for math, but this is across ACT score. It's across SAT, GPA, other types of testing that you're using at your institution. We see this success across all races, all ages, and other student characteristics that you could think of, Pell eligibility, things like that. I've actually seen institutions where this is closing their equity gaps. It's not a rising tide lift all boats approach. This strategy actually targets the students who need it and is in decreasing our equity gaps in gateway course completion. And most interestingly, we're seeing a lot of evidence starting to come out that students who take a co-requisite actually can outperform their peers in a second subsequent course. So let me break that down. If you took English 100 as in had a co-requisite support with that, and you go on to English 102, a lot of these students outperform the students who did not have a co-requisite for English 100. So it's really increasing their ability. Other things, this cohort model approach that I'm going to talk about in a little bit of co-requisite, it encourages social belongingness. And we know this is a key element of students in college, the social belongingness, keeping them connected to their peers, keeping them connected to their professors and to the institution. And because of the way co-requisite is set up, we see this cohort building, social belongingness of students who are in a co-requisite support together. It also enhances a growth mindset. So if you put students into college level courses and you tell them, you can do it. You will be successful. I will be here to support you. You are college ready. That's a whole different mindset than giving them a pre-college assignment, a course with elementary in the title, that backward facing motivation busting mentality. So let me define co-requisite support for you. A lot of you asked this question again in the registration. Thank you all for being so thoughtful when you put questions in there. That really helped all of the presenters today to form our presentations. So it has a few foundational elements for co-req. First, co-requisites must be offered in alignment with the gateway course. So in the same semester at the same time. This is absolutely critical. What did we talk about earlier? Attrition points, right? We need to eliminate the attrition points. So even a course that is designed to have 6 weeks of a developmental course, followed by 10 weeks of a gateway course, has that little attrition point in there between experiences. And these attrition points wreak havoc on student success, as I already hope hammered home to you. Key point number 2 is that the support is directly aligned to the outcomes in the gateway course. Even though you might hear the term co-requisite remediation, the content should not be remedial in nature. The support needs to provide more time for students to master the outcomes in the gateway course, the content, and make sure that they get to those outcomes. So that support should be directly aligned to that material. Third, that support should provide extra time on task. This should be a time to review, preview, or add extra time spent on content delivered in the gateway course. Ideally, with the instructor and peers there to provide that on-demand support and to build that cohort of social belongingness. And finally, this is important. We get a lot of questions about, okay, well, how do we do this? What's the best way to do it, right? What's the Cadillac model? There is no silver bullet that has been discovered yet of co-requisite remediation or co-requisite support. And I know Theo wrote his dissertation on this topic. I'm currently working on mine on this topic, and this is what I'm looking at. Is there a silver bullet? But right now we don't think so. So models can vary in delivery and structure, format, pedagogical strategy, you name it, and an institution has tried it. And all of these different ways that people are doing this increase student success. As long as it eliminates attrition points, aligns to a gateway course content and the outcomes in the gateway course, and provides more time for a student to achieve mastery, you've got a co-requisite. So here's some different models. This demonstrates the different ways that folks are doing this. These are probably the most common types. There's a lot more. There's a study out of Texas that goes into a bunch of different ways you can do this. The first one there is a paired support course with a 3-credit gateway course. And you may have heard of this as the ALP model, the Accelerated Learning Program. This comes from Peter Adams out of the Community College of Baltimore County in Maryland. It's pretty much the most well-known model, the most researched model of co-requisite, and it is a very common model in English. Now, this is a tough one sometimes to implement. They want you to have the same instructor in both courses. There's a lot of logistical perfection that needs to be there to implement the ALP model. But that said, institutions often tweak that model, that Cadillac version that I was talking about earlier, to fit institutional needs. So you have the 3-credit gateway course, and it is directly paired with a support course in your banner system or whatever management system you use for your courses. Other options include the second one, which is making the gateway course just a little bit longer, having more time on task. So instead of a 3-credit course, it's a 4-credit course. And this gives those students who need the Corequisite a lot of extra time with their instructor and with their peers. And finally, this last one is this 3-credit gateway course plus a required lab. And so this is where students can attend an extra session of something, writing lab, something likely monitored by a TA or a graduate assistant, to receive support outside of the course. The one example of this is the Emporium model that is often used in math that many of you may have heard of, where you have a proctor and a computer lab, and the students work on math that is aligned to the gateway course, but it is spending extra time on task, but there's not an instructor in there, it's actually proctored. So that's why I know somebody in the registration asked, why is this different than tutoring? Because, you know, this is all extra time spent on task, hopefully with your professor, spending a lot of time aligned directly to your course. It's not just, you know, extra work. So students are placed, this is what this model actually looks like. So you saw the map earlier. This is what a map would look like for Corequisite. This is what a student's options would look like at an institution with no developmental education that is implementing a Corequisite model. Students are placed into a gateway course with support or without. And so there are 2 options with no points of attrition, nowhere. You see no points of attrition on this map, no arrows, which is very good. One more thing I wanted to bring up, because during the registration process, a lot of you had questions about gateway math and English. And I think that's probably because of Nevada's policy. And I know Theo will probably talk about this later, as well as James. We'll touch on this idea of gateway math and English in the first year and why it's important. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a chart here, because that's what I'm good at, showing you research that shows evidence of gateway momentum. So this is students who pass gateway math and English in the first year is that top bar. And that's how many graduated in 6 years. And then those who did not pass a gateway math and English in the first year, their graduation rate is that second bar. So you can see how much more likely students are to graduate if they get these gateway courses under their belts right away. And that's why I am so complimentary and of what NSHE is doing around the gateway math and English policy. I think it's this type of policy provides tremendous outcomes for students. And I think you'll see a lot of great things coming out of that. And that citation there, you'll get these slides. So you'll all have this. You'll be able to look that up. That's from CCRC. So you can look at some of the other ones like 15 credits and some of the other cool stuff that is going on in the research world. So due to all of this, all these mountains of evidence that COREC works and that placement reforms are imperative, states, systems, and institutions have been instituting policies aimed at getting more students to and through gateway math and English. For instance, I talked about California earlier and how they were really looking at placement. Well, all of that research actually led them to have a statewide policy, AB 705 is what it's called, Assembly Bill 705, that puts the burdens on institutions to prove that students would be better off placed in a developmental course. Now, based on everything I just showed you, I don't think that will be very easy for those institutions. So essentially, they really are working on scaling a Corequisite approach or alternative approaches to get students into gateway courses and eliminate developmental education. It was pretty creative. And Texas, their entire state, again, with it's a House bill, and the number of it is escaping me, but their House bill is aimed at eliminating developmental education, virtually eliminating it over the next few years. And that was passed, I think, 2 years ago. And at the system level in Georgia, they passed policy that completely eliminated developmental ed, and all students now have co-requisite options in the university system of Georgia. And here's the other thing, you can do this at your institutions as well, right? If we know this is the right thing. A lot of institutions are creating innovative placement policy with what I mentioned earlier, and they're gradually erasing the need for developmental courses. And we love to see this. So these systems, these states, these institutions are really designed for equitable student success. And I wanted to share one more incredibly important citation with you. I know the folks at NSHE that are on this call, all of you on this call, and us at Student Ready Strategies are members of a network that I mentioned before called Strong Start to Finish. And you can visit their website at strongstart.org. But earlier this year, I think it was this year. I don't know. I've lost all track of time and space in 2020. So I think it was in March, but don't quote me on that. They actually put out this document. It's a revised version of the core principles for transforming remediation within a comprehensive student success framework. So you can find that document there at strongstart.org. This outlines a lot of what I talked about today, but it goes a little bit further into each topic. And it's a great resource that was actually informed by the entire field of developmental education reform. So our organization plus probably 25 others worked on this document. So we're really proud of it. And it can bolster your reform efforts by thinking about how to integrate them with each other, how they all work together. And every single one of the pages on here has a bunch of citations. So if you're interested in doing more research around this, understanding even more about this whole reform movement, please visit this site. Please download the core principles. It will really help you as you're talking about this with students, with your colleagues, and other people on your campus. And this document can really help to transform each and every one of your institutions into even more student-ready places of higher education. So with that being said, that's why you, advisors, are so absolutely critical to this strategy. As I mentioned earlier, you know about this asset-based language and deficit mindset, growth mindset. You've been trained in this as advisors, how to talk to your students. And with that idea in your mind, you're going to be able to talk about the co-requisite approach in a really compelling way with your students. You are going to give them the best chance at enrolling. You're the ones that are going to help them enroll into a co-requisite. And you can advocate. You can be advocates on your campus for change and for reform, particularly around multiple measures, to make sure students actually get a chance to take a gateway course in the first year. So now I know the rest of this whole professional development experience is going to be very, very focused on what you need to do in Nevada as advisors to help with this approach. You're going to hear later, you're going to hear all about Nevada, what you're doing there in terms of policy and other things from Theo and James. And then we're going to move into some of the implementation, action plans, best practices that are happening in Nevada after that. So I'm excited to hear from all of them and learn very specifically about what you're doing in Nevada. But right now, what we want to do is open it up for questions about the national landscape in co-requisites. We're here for Student Ready Strategies, can answer your questions about that. And again, I'm going to move to this slide. So if you want to write down our website and our email address, we're always happy to address questions later as well. You'll also get these slides in email after, and there'll be a video available right there. So you'll be able to watch this again if you want to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa and Sarah. And thanks to everyone who I can see some questions beginning to populate in the Q&A box there. So please continue to add any questions you have about the information that was just presented. We also have some wonderful questions from the registration process. And thanks to everyone who added a question when you were registering for today's event. And we could start with some of those questions. And Vanessa, I think you really went into depth about how co-requisite support increases student completion and the benefit of that model compared to traditional remediation. Some of the other questions, how is co-requisite support different than tutoring?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that. I think tutoring is one thing, it's optional, right? Students don't have to go to tutoring. This is something that they are required to do. They have to go to these courses. It's something that they're enrolled in that shows up on their transcript. So it might be a required version of tutoring, but as I mentioned before, it's much more intensive than that. And we really suggest the models that have not just a TA, but have your professor in that classroom, creating that real sense of a cohort, getting extra time with your professor, which really differentiates it from tutoring.
And then for learning centers, how can learning centers support students learning in the co-requisite courses?
Interesting. Let me think about that one for a second. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think it's similar to what Vanessa just said about tutoring. If it's, if it's a place that a student has to take the initiative to go to, a different location, interact with a different set of people that they may not be interacting with in their courses, and especially if that is all optional, the chances of them doing that are a lot less likely than if it's just baked into the cake of the course. Right. So again, it's, the student in a co-requisite doesn't need to find their way to their co-requisite support. They just go where their class schedule tells them, and they find it in a systematic and a regular cadence.
What does the research say about students who complete their math and English in the first semester compared to those who wait?
Yeah, and so I think that goes back to this slide that we talked about here that really shows you the benefits of that. I think I went pretty in depth with that one.
How does the co-requisite handle the students in Math 91 or early algebra or less than high school level?
So a co-requisite would, so students who are testing at those levels, I'm assuming that's what the question is, students who are testing at those levels. So I think one thing to make sure is that those students actually, what that test is accurate. There's actually no evidence out there of any floor for students being successful in a co-requisite. As you can see, that was under a 13. They're still much more successful if they're put into a gateway course with support. So we truly believe that there is not a student who can't be successful in this model. There is evidence out there actually from Georgia and a little bit from Tennessee, from Tristan Denley, that shows that students who fail a co-requisite actually fail most of all the rest of their courses. And so we know when you look at that, and you can pull data at your own institutions to see that if a student is failing a co-requisite, failing all their other courses, you can quickly make that jump to, this probably was an academic preparation issue. This is probably something going on in their personal lives, something that is holding them back from being successful in all of their college courses, and not just that. And so I want to encourage you all to start thinking about, okay, I know that all students can be successful with the right supports, and this is the right support for them.
Vanessa, I want to make another point on that. Will you go back to the slide that has the co-requisite success versus the traditional remediation with the blue and purple bars? So one thing I want to point out here is if you look at the blue bars, the pinnacle, that 18 ACT, that's a 26% success rate. The less than 13 ACT on the co-requisite is a 33%. So the less than 13 ACT folks in co-requisite still do significantly better than the 18 ACT folks in the old model. So when we think about who this is, who is going to benefit from co-requisite support, it really is everyone.
Right.
Questions in the Q&A box. For the second gateway option, the 4-credit class, how would you foresee that extra time working in an online class?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's just maybe doing synchronous learning in that extra hour, making sure you're there to support those students. I'm not an instructional designer, so I'm not totally positive about how I would structure that. But I think a lot of our instructors that do co-rec are very creative with the way they do this. And I do know co-requisites online in general have been proven to work actually sometimes better than those in an actual classroom. We've seen really good outcomes from online co-requisites. And so, yeah.
So do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Please take that, yes.
I think this is a great question, and we're actually seeing this play out in a lot of our English courses across the system. And it really, Ashley, to your question, it has more to do with time on task in the gateway course. So, it's not necessarily going to be like we see in the other models, like a 3+1 or a 3+2. It's more so for credit hours, like you would see in like Calc 1, Math 181, and things like that, where it's just a 4 credit course, the students meeting for 4 credit hours worth of credits a week. So, whereas in the other two models, there may be a more intentional divide between what the college level course is and what the support section is. In that second model, it's just all embedded. It's just more seat time in the course.
Yeah, that's right.
Another question from Trisha: has credit amount of the co-requisite courses played a factor in the success rate? So a 5 credit co-rec math versus 4 credit course.
Sure. I don't know that it has paid into the factor of the success rates of it, but what I can say is that some institutions, and they do this in Georgia, where I talked about how they eliminated developmental ed. What they do is they place students into varying levels of support. So some students might just need 1 extra credit of support, some might need 2 or 3, depending on what their multiple measure score looks like. And so there is an opportunity for institutions to be creative about what that credit looks like, and how they're supporting their students. Another thing I will say is that the ALP model, which is the first model up here, a lot of institutions started out doing 3 credit gateway course and then a 3 credit support course, which again, as I mentioned, is sort of a heavy lift with faculty to be doing that. And so some institutions have found that that's not necessary. They can walk that back. So I think it really depends on, it's one of those, your institution is unique and can use this to sort of be innovative and creative and see what works and see what students need and be willing to continuously improve what that model looks like.
So I heard you mention outcomes of the co-rec model in university systems. Is there data and info about outcomes in the community college systems?
Sure, yeah. So this is actually from a community college. Most of the evidence of co-rec is from community colleges. As we said earlier, open access community colleges are most of the places where remedial developmental education is prevalent. And so all the research that you're going to read about from CCRC and a few other of the research firms, MDRC, that is all from 2-year institutions.
Stephen says, you mentioned that GPA is a better indicator for placement than test scores. Is there a similar graph for performance with high school GPA on the x-axis instead of ACT scores?
I think that there might be one in that study, but I would have to go check, Stephen, and see. But Theo, you might have a better idea too if you think about the research you've looked at.
Yeah, I think it's not as beautiful as what you see on this slide, but the multiple measures assessment project out of California actually has some, for a data nerd, I think they are beautiful decision trees that show, if a student was in high school and took pre-calc and scored a C or better, this was their percentage. This was their likelihood of completing the gateway course versus a student who didn't take pre-calc but maybe got a B or higher on Algebra 2. And I am happy to find that the link to that and share with you all in the chat.
Well, I want to make sure to keep us on time here. We want to give you all a 5-minute water, bathroom, make sure your child is doing their e-learning break. What we would request of you is that you do not log off of the Zoom. Stay logged in, please, so you don't have to try to get back in. You can just stop your video, and I think you're already muted, and we will just plan to see you back here in 5 minutes right at the top of the hour. Okay, everyone, welcome back. It's a couple minutes after the hour, so we want to keep moving along in our presentation here today. You've had kind of the national overview, and now our friends at NCHE, Theo, James, and Natalie are going to provide an overview of the NCHE Co-Requisite Implementation Action Plan. So I will hand it over to them.
Excellent. Thank you. I had to take a moment to figure out how to take myself on unmute. Um, Thank you all for continuing to join us. I realized I forgot to give myself introduce myself, which I will do in just one moment. But for the next hour, we're going to be talking about where NSHE is at in terms of implementing co-requisite math and English. I heard a number of you in the comments talk about the role that this has for students with disabilities, for our returning adults and adult learners, and we will address, if not all of those, most of them. And then again, feel free to use that question and answer feature so that the questions can be broadcasted to us all. I am joined by Dr. Natalie Brown, the Executive Director of Advising and Access Services at Truckee Meadows Community College, whom most of you know her work, and James McCoy, the Chief Academic Officer at the College of Southern Nevada, who was formerly with the Nevada System of Higher Education, serving as the Director of Co-Requisite Implementation. And I am Dr. Theo Meek. I am the Senior Research Analyst at the Nevada System of Higher Education. So digging right in, we are going to give you a very broad overview and then start drilling down really into the details of what this implementation looks like for our advising community. And the 230 plus of you that are on our call today really show a commitment and eagerness to learn this information. So again, thank you for joining this call. We will cover NSHE more broad sweeping and how this reform has really nestled quite nicely into a lot of the other work that our system administration and Board of Regents are doing. We'll talk about what the actual policy is. We will talk about the co-requisite implementation task force and provide a very broad timeline on where we're at. And then we will talk about the system-wide approach to co-requisite implementation and building the institutional action plans, implementation action plans, of which I sent out to everyone who was registered on Wednesday. And then Dr. Brown will take us through more specifically some of the advising specific components, and then we will close out with kind of our final thoughts and next steps. First, this initiative, not only is it the right thing to do, but it fits very nicely into the broad overview of what NSHE's strategic goals are. As many of you have already known, we have 5 strategic goals: access, success, close the achievement gap, workforce, and research. I believe very strongly that we are unable to close the achievement gap until we reform our systemically discriminatory developmental education reform practices, and that is precisely what we're doing with the introduction of co-requisite implementation. Co-requisite implementation directly supports access, success, and closing the achievement gap. And so our Board of Regents were very eager in taking this on and very excited to implement it, as we all have been as well. There are a number of initiatives that and strategies that NSHE has taken on. And for those of you that have been in the system for a while, you know our 15 to Finish campaign and initiative. You know our Gateway Math and English, our Metro Momentum's pathway work that's especially taken off in the Southern Nevada area with Purpose First, areas of study, the implementation of a performance-based funding formula, and lastly, co-requisite math and English. These all work together to support those 5 strategic goals with a particular emphasis on access, success, and closing the achievement gap. You heard Vanessa say earlier that there is no silver bullet, and I will confirm and reiterate that there is no silver bullet. The implementation of co-requisite as a standalone strategy does not solve the issue of achievement gaps for underrepresented students and just dramatically low success rates in developmental education. It is that initiative alongside a really systems thinking approach, as Sarah mentioned earlier, that creates good reform that actually moves the needle and promotes student success. The implementation of co-requisite support has been a very long time in the making. There were at least 7 direct years in which many of us, including our Vice Chancellor, Crystal Abba, have been laying the foundation on really broad sweeping developmental education reform. In 2012 through 2015, the system underwent a remedial transformation project and the task force on gateway mathematics success. That report was really in recent history, one of the major documents that brought forward a lot of the concerns that traditional developmental education was failing our students. We were seeing through that report graduation rates between 0.8% and 10% for students in developmental education. And it was really at that point that we started the conversation on gateway or on co-requisite implementation. But at the point in 2015, there was not enough national data and research that could really drive us forward and allow us to reform. The landscape of higher education looks a lot different today than it did 5 years ago. And us being NSHE, alongside many other states and systems of higher education, have been laying the foundation for co-requisite implementation. In the past 4 years, we have done the Gateway Course Success Policy, which some of you are very intimately, perhaps too intimately, involved with. And then we've also provided system implementation support via an implementation liaison, which was actually a role that I was serving for a number of years in really helping the institutions think through implementation. And it was really the first time that the system office was intimately involved with implementation. Whereas before, the system office would normally take a role in the policy process, formulating and seeking passage and getting all of that done. The office was not as intimately involved with how the institutions implemented it. The Gateway Course Success Policy was one of the first times that NSHE was really involved with that process. Additionally, I published a policy paper entitled Traditional Remediation is Not Working, of which I accompanied on the Wednesday email as well. And that was requested of me by the Board of Regents and then Chancellor Tom Riley to really give an overview of the highlights, or if you want to call them lowlights, of developmental education. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But much of the preceding slides are materials from that policy paper. So to give you an idea of what we were looking for, the train and the tunnel that we were looking down when we talked about developmental education reform, Vanessa talked about with their curricular mapping exercise, in which uncovered just an array of different varying levels of developmental education. And she looked no different. For our students at the lowest levels of what we've historically referred to as academic unpreparedness, they had 4 semesters of remediation to reach their first gateway course completion. And in some cases, students were even required to pass like an exam like the AccuPlacer in order to continue on into their next course. 2 wrongs do not make a right in that situation, and that is especially true. You can see here, this is the entire NSHE overview on our math pathways as of 2019. So very long, tedious pathways. And as Vanessa outlined before, it is not the fault of one individual or one instructor. It is not that instructors that are teaching the lowest the courses, skill certificates, CTMs, the Math 92s or Math 91s of the world. It is not that they're doing anything wrong. It is a multiplicative effect. It is a 70% pass rate here, partnered with a 10% retention drop between the next courses and another 70% and another 10%. And all of a sudden we go from a class of 100 students to a class of 30 students. And those 30 students have just only made it into the first college level course. That's not to say all of the other factors that they're going to encounter throughout their academic career that are going to challenge their retention and persistence at the institutions. So that's an overview of where we were at. With regard to the data, one of the first things when we went around and presented this policy paper, it created a lot of concern and frustration and anxiety from our math and English faculty, from some of our administrative and advisor friends, out of concern that we were using national data to inform a local and state practice. I think a lot of the sentiment that we heard from math and English faculty were, no, wait, our students are different. Nevada students are different than Tennessee students, different than Georgia, different than California, different than New York. And when you look at the data, that's just simply not true. When we look at placement rates, they are nearly identical. 68% of community college students in Nevada are placing into remediation, 40% even higher than the national norm for public four-year students. We have an overrepresentation of ethnic minorities that are enrolled in developmental education. Over half of our Black students and nearly half of our Hispanic students are all required to enroll into remediation versus their white counterparts, which is about 1/3. And the degree completion rates are even lower than some of the national averages, with less than 10% across the nation graduating who place into developmental education. And as of our fall 2015 and 2016 gateway cohorts, we only had 8% of students who place in traditional remediation who went on to graduate. And so when you think about that 8% as a population of 100 students, 8 will go on to graduate after 3 years at a community college or 6 years at a Nevada State or the 2 universities. We congratulate those 8, but our focus is on the 92 other students that dropped out, that are still spiraling in the system, accumulating credits, moving towards excess credit. Those 92 are really the focus of this policy. It is serving those students who, again, are no longer in higher education. They have accumulated what we presume is student debt, and they don't have a degree or certificate or credential to show for their work in higher education. That's who this entire reform has been focused around this entire time. Just think about those 92 students and the disservice that we have done to those 92. That is what we're reforming. Again, I want to echo the primary concern has been underrepresented minorities. I will say it again, we as a system are unable to close the achievement gap unless we reform our developmental education practices. You see that on the left side is a 2014 Complete College America cohort held against our 2016 Gateway cohort. And, there's a number of different student populations, but what is most concerning to us is our Indigenous student population, our Black and Hispanic student, and our Black and Hispanic students that are deeply overrepresented in developmental education. When we look at, from a community college perspective, the degree completion rates, this was the slide and the data point which our regents, our Board of Regents, had a lot of concern with. This shows degree completion rates for students at the less than high school level, the Math 91s, the skills certificates 92s, at the high school level, Math 95 and Math 96, and at the college level, and their degree completion rates. And you see for every population where students are placed into Math 99 or below, their degree completion rates are far lower than students placed directly into the college level course. So what my policy paper really found was, again, traditional remediation is not working, as the title states. Too many students start in remediation and are unsuccessful in completing their gateway course, with many not even reaching the gateway course because they're 3 to 4 semesters deep. There are psychological challenges and long pathways to gateway course completion, and this is directly in line with what Vanessa had mentioned before about the deficit-mindedness of students, basic, low skill, elementary algebra, low skill English, things like that. We are telling the student, what we have historically told the student is, you are not college ready. If you take these courses and spend all this money, you can then become college ready. At that point, you can take college level courses. That is a major psychological challenge for students to be told, I've been admitted to the institution, but I'm not college ready. And I have to do all of these steps and spend all of this money and take all this time in order to be college ready. And just one last time, just for resonation, closing the achievement gap starts with reinventing remediation or developmental education. Co-requisite remediation results in much higher student success outcomes. I did not share all of the data on co-requisite in this presentation because like Vanessa, I did not want to put everyone to sleep. But if you are interested, which I've seen a number of you in the comments please take a look at the policy paper that I produced. You'll see a number of references to some of the data on co-requisite. If you are so inclined, I am happy to send you all my dissertation as well, in which analyzes the role of co-requisite support in downstream academic courses, which is another question that we saw. And UNR and Nevada State College have long implemented co-requisite, and we were beginning to see very promising initial data and empirical data from them. And so those institutions alongside the national work really helped motivate the board to adopt such a sweeping comprehensive reform. And again, as Vanessa has articulated, regardless of what we determined as academic preparation, success levels are higher for students in co-requisite remediation. Think about those students with an ACT of a 13 or less that were 11 times more likely to complete the gateway course having gone through a co-requisite model than they are in a traditional developmental education model. Co-requisite has supported students across all spectrums. We have yet to identify, and national data has yet to identify, a student population that fares better in traditional developmental education than in the co-requisite model. So now I'll talk about the policy. Again, I want to echo Kate in thanking you all for the questions that you've submitted beforehand. This gave us an opportunity to really tailor some of what we needed to talk about, and I will do so over the next 2 slides to help answer some of the questions around the policy. The purpose of the policy is to provide just-in-time academic support at the time the student is using it the most. Throughout this entire process, I've used the analogy of making pasta, and think about in semester 1, you're learning what the pasta, you're learning the ingredient title, that you're making fresh semolina pasta. In semester 2, you're learning the ingredients, and in semester 3, you're actually learning the instructions. The idea of the co-requisite model is you're learning the ingredients at the time that you're going to use them in the directions versus relying on information 2 or 3 semesters previously to actually make the pasta. The purpose is also to eliminate traditional lengthy pathways of remediation and to ensure every student is enrolled in the college level gateway course within the first year of enrollment. I want to spend a moment on this because there have been a number of questions about enrollment. In the first policy that went to the board, it said students need to be enrolled in math and English within the first semester of enrollment, so that students would need to take both English and math in the first semester. Your math and English colleagues, along with your academic advising representatives on the task force, spoke very loudly and clearly that that was not a model that was going to be successful to students. And so instead, we have revised that policy to say enrollment within the first year. So many of the institutions are prioritizing for a student that needs co-requisite support in both math and English. Many of the institutions are prioritizing English over math, but the institutions have the flexibility to do that. And again, the focus is on closing the achievement gap. The actual policy revises the Gateway Core Success Policy and will be effective in fall 2021. It eliminates traditional prerequisite pathways of remediation and mandates co-requisite support with 2 exceptions. High school students that are still enrolled in high school, whereas Math 95 and Math 96 have been more college preparatory, those can persist. So think about WNC's Jumpstart program, CSN, TMCC, GBC's robust dual credit options. Those can continue to remain. Additionally, I've already heard a number of comments about students with disabilities. This policy specifically excludes students with disabilities. When we looked at the data for courses like Math 119 and 119, those were extremely successful models for students with disabilities, and they are very tightly controlled between the math departments and the disability resource centers. So I just want to make that explicitly known that students with disabilities documented disabilities going through their DRCs are excluded from this policy. In complete transparency, because they've been excluded, the math and English faculty have not had very robust conversations yet about what to do with or how to best serve students with disabilities. So I would check with your institutional representatives about if the plan is to continue Math 1.9 and 119, or if they're looking at a different model. And with that, I would like to pass it off to James McCoy to talk a little bit more about boots on the ground implementation.
You bet. Yeah, thank you, Theo. And again, my name is James McCoy. I had the distinct pleasure of working with the INSHE Corequisite Implementation Task Force over the last 9 or 10 months, and want to just give a big shout out to everyone who's on this call right now who diligently worked on the implementation action plan on behalf of your institutions, and certainly in regard to the Board of Regents policy in this space. Also want to give a quick shout out to Sarah, Vanessa, and Kate, and Theo for setting the stage so nicely for this next piece of the conversation. My goal is to remind you that this is just a 10,000 or so foot view today as it relates to INSHE's and our institution's implementation action plan, and that we have an entire series over the next several months specifically designed for all of our advisors and all of our student success support staff to continue to get deeper and deeper into the weeds on this implementation in preparation for fall 21. And that also includes institutional specific professional development that'll be coming in February. And so you'll be hearing from your advising and administrative leads at your respective campuses for what that professional development workshop will look like, or series of workshops will look like again in February. So I start today with an acknowledgement that this work has been incredibly difficult, as Theo had mentioned earlier today, particularly amidst the ridiculousness of all the things that are 2020. We think about the pandemic and our response mechanisms to that. We think about the social injustices of this world that have created a lot of turbulence in this space for us. And we think about the economic declines of our 2020 year and what are about to happen in even in more significant spaces. And despite all that, the Corequisite Implementation Task Force made the collaborative decision to stay the course. There were a lot of reasons why we could have asked the Board of Regents for more time, given everything I just mentioned about 2020. But the reality is, if we don't do this work now, if we didn't do this work over the last 9 or 10 months, our achievement gap data would only get more severe. And so it is for those reasons that we all decided to push forward together. And you'll see, as you see on the slide, it has been truly a collaborative effort for representation from all of our institutions, and a lot of considerations as well as we think about the different institution types and the missions of each institution and where they're at in this remedial reform space. It certainly was a significant lift, and for that, my gratitude to our English and math faculty, our administrator and advising staff from all 7 of our teaching institutions. In fact, I want to show you just a quick glimpse. Theo, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Show you a quick glimpse here of the membership. This is the formalized membership of the statewide task force. And as you look over to the last 2 columns, you'll see the administration and advising representatives by institution. And so particularly for our advisors on the call today, these are your leads. And so as you're looking to more institutionalized perspective on the implementation plan and how to prepare for fall 21 and the onboarding of students this spring for fall 21, these are the folks, these are the leaders that you'll want to reach out to at your institution. Okay, Theo. I want to give you a brief overview of the work that's been happening over the last a little over a year, I suppose. We look back to fall 2019, and the Nevada System of Higher Education established the INSHE Implementation Task Force. This task force charged with looking at the various nuances of things decided, considerations that needed to be had, and then ultimately putting those decisions into an implementation plan that will be presented to the Board of Regents for consideration of approval. And so in fall 2019, the task force emerged with the membership that we just described. It was very important for us to make sure we had faculty leadership from both English and math, advising leadership from across the institutions, and of course, administrative representatives from a variety of different student success and student services filter points and things like the registrar's office. We transition now into the second tab on meeting and planning. And previous to the COVID pandemic and our ability to travel in fall 19, we had to make a quick diversion and engage in this sort of Zooming experience. And I'm pleased to report that experience did not stop the COREC task force meeting. In fact, in many ways, the lack of the ability to travel across the state from our task force representatives was a blessing in disguise, because we were able to get together much more frequently in this sort of virtual environment, really have some deep conversations in subcommittee work in this space as well. So that's what really took shape over the spring 2020 semester. Our implementation action subcommittees around English and correct math and advising and communication and training and professional development, et cetera, all really began to put the pen to the pad in developing this implementation plan in spring of 2020. They were looking at mathematic co-requisite pathways and structures, as Vanessa was talking about earlier today, and trying to decide what would be best in terms of our work in the INSHE institutions. Same thing with English. And we were also looking to see how we could scale existing co-requisite support courses. As you all know, many of our institutions across the system have been engaged in piloting a variety of different structures for how co-rec English and math would look, and have had some great success. I give a big shout out to UNR, in fact, in that regard, who perhaps has been the longest standing co-requisite pilot initiative institution within the state. And we learned a lot of lessons from early data from those pilots. And so those were used as a platform by which to help provide some structure to how math, particularly co-requisite implementation, was going to work. I move on to the summer of 2020. And at this point, as you all know, our reaction to 2020 and the pandemic was in full force. And so one of the things that occurred in 2020, which was quite significant, was we decided to pivot for just a moment. And that pivot point was to not try to push forward an implementation action plan over the summer and bring it to finalization, namely because we had a lot of faculty who were off contract in the summertime. And so we needed to sort of disaggregate our action plan into two distinct parts. And if you've been following this conversation with the Board of Regents meetings over the last several months, you'll know that our INSHE co-requisite implementation action plan is divided into two parts. And that's what Theo had sent to you earlier this week, for those of you who were registered on time. And that's part one and part two. And we're gonna go through that, those nuances today, and we're gonna get deeper into the weeds as the next several months continue. But the implementation action plans focus on a variety of different things. And Theo, if you go to the next slide, I'll kind of preview those. There was a general framework that we all agreed to, and this from a task force standpoint. And this decision point happened just over a year ago, where the implementation action task force agreed to approach the implementation of this work from some commonality buckets: common pathways for math and English co-requisite structural design, common placement conversation, in so much as if there are standardized sorts of assessments that would be used, whereas a score is a result of those assessments, things like ACT, SAT, Smarter, Balance, and PARC, and ALEX, PPL, and EdReady, et cetera. In so much as those instruments are used as part of this placement experience, that we would have commonality in those assessment scores or cutoff scores for entry into the common gateway math and English pathways. We also agreed to the establishment of common communication protocols, brand messaging. You'll note on the bottom right-hand portion of the screen, the INSHE co-requisite implementation task force logo that was developed, the color scheme associated with that, and we'll give you much more on how the system has been able to support, through the generous professionalism of Great Basin College communication team, a full robust communication toolkit. More on that in a little bit. And then finally, taking a centered approach on our advising and enrollment enforcement protocols, learning from each other in this space. And at the next hour, we'll hear directly from some of our advisors across the system who are going to share some good lessons learned so far. And we'll also get into the weeds around enrollment enforcement, more specifically during your institutional February professional development session, but a little bit today as well. Okay, Thea. So this is an overview of what has occurred in part 1 of the action plan. And so as you're looking at the document that Theo sent earlier this week, you'll notice that there are some significant information in the action plan associated with English and math as it relates to placement, as it relates to pathways, and as it relates to the assessment of student learning outcomes. So we'll go through that a little bit in just a moment. There's also a significant nod to the importance of faculty training and advisor training. Professional development and conversation in each of these spaces. It's no surprise then that as we talk about today being the sort of kickoff to the Advising Summit around co-requisite implementation, that it truly is just the kickoff, that there'll be plenty of opportunity to continue to engage in PD training and conversation well into the end of the spring semester and beyond. And again, I want to replicate Theo's message with a big shout out to our funding supporters like Strong to Finish and ECMC and our friends at Nevada Energy for supporting financially and in brain power this professional development series. And then you'll see in part 1 as well an overview of the communication toolkit and our communication strategies associated with different audiences that need to be communicated with. And then we give an overview or a preview of part 2. And then in part 2, we get into some of the nuances around enrollment enforcement. So if you're kind of wondering, where is my institution sitting right now with making sure that students are actually enrolling in their Gateway Math and English course with or without co-requisite support, I encourage you to take a look at part 2 of that action plan. Become familiar with it because each institution did take an incredible amount of time to work through this. I will tell you, I'll be the first maybe to tell you that it is not perfect at this juncture. That many institutions are currently working through some technological solutions that may make it a little bit more closer to perfect. And that work is continuing today. But we have these plans in place, at least for fall 21, to be in compliance with board policy that Theo went through. Go ahead, Theo. We'll start talking about the overview of English and how they've landed. And again, the specifics are noted in part 1 of the action plan. But we'll focus on placement, pathways, and assessment. We'll do the same for math in a moment. So with English placement, as I mentioned earlier, the English subcommittee of the task force agreed to bringing in alignment standardized test scores. That's already prescribed by board policy, particularly as it relates to the standardization of entry into Gateway Math and English from an ACT, an SAT, a Smarter Balanced, or a PARCC score. But right now, our institutions are also looking at other very standardized experiences as it relates to multiple measures in some parts, and as it relates to just other kinds of assessment tools and practice tools like EdReady and Alex PPL. And so in so much as those instruments are being used across the institutions, those will become standardized cut scores as well. And again, rest assured your math and your English faculty on the task force are having these conversations continually. So their English folks across the system are looking at a variety of other different variables or instruments or experiences to place students directly into the Gateway English course or to encourage their placement into COREC. And that's through the use of student portfolios. Some institutions are looking at and have actually already applied multiple measure variables in those conversations. And then there are a variety of institutions who are also utilizing the guided self-placement model. So you'll hear more about where your institution is at if you haven't already, certainly during the February institutional session for advisors. A note on pathways now. Sorry, Theo, if you can go back to English real quick, just a note on pathways and assessment. There are 3 parallel pathways for English across the system. Of course, we have the traditional English 101 composition course for students who place right there. And that is not going away. As you know it today, 3 credits across the system. For our universities, they have adopted a model where they are using English 101, and that will be coupled with COREC support labs. And Vanessa talked a little bit about the history on this and the efficacy around this structure earlier today. For our system, it's the same thing. It's a 3-credit English. In fact, it is the English 101 course for 3 credits, and it is attached to a 2 lab credit experience. And depending on the institution, be it UNR or UNLV, they have a couple of different nuances you're going to want to make sure you discuss in your February sessions related to what students need 2 lab credits, maybe some students just need 1 lab credit, and how that relates to writing and reading at those institutions. For our community colleges and for Nevada State College, they have settled on English 100, and many of your institutions are already keenly aware of this because this is your space already. You're already in this course. And this is a 5 credit time embedded support experience. And as Theo mentioned earlier, the English 100 course and English in general with co-requisite support is really about more time on task. And so I know we had a few questions that came in over the last couple of weeks during the registration cycle for this session that talked about how do you ensure that on time, just in time support is happening. And particularly for English, it is more time on task, as our English faculty have continued to reinforce. And then finally, on the assessment front, our English faculty for co-requisite implementation have agreed to some common student learning outcomes for the co-requisite experience, that they have institutional assessment plans that are based on common principles across the system. And so while we want to make sure that each institution continues to have their own authority over how they assess student learning as it relates to the outcomes, the common principles are there to guide the assessment of student learning in the co-requisite just-in-time, more time on task approach. And the other really cool thing is our English faculty have agreed to review the outcomes of the institutional student learning outcome assessment on an annualized basis and as a task force across the system. So we're excited to learn more from the outcome of that assessment. Theo, we'll go ahead and go to math. You'll see some parallels here in math with placement pathways and assessment, first being placement. And just like English, they've got standardized test scores as prescribed by board policy. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some other instruments like EdReady at Nevada State College and Alex PPL at UNLV and CSN, and UNR's exploring Alex PPL now, and a variety of other multiple measures that are kind of brought into the placement conversation. I know we've got some placement experts and professionals on our call from a variety of institutions today. So we're certainly hoping that your influence and conversation will be incorporated, particularly as you all prepare for your February sessions on this very topic by institution. For pathways, this has been a very unique conversation as I kind of chuckle a little bit, because our math faculty have been so deeply committed to this work around common pathways, and not the least of which, perhaps because number one, it's the right thing to do from a transfer and articulation standpoint for our students, but number two, our Board of Regents has asked us to do this. In fact, they've asked us to do this more than once, and so where we landed right now with math pathways is that there are 2 distinct pathways that are formalized in part 1 of the action plan. And you'll see those specifics. They are centered around liberal arts programming. So students who are majoring in a liberal arts experience who typically would have Math 120 as their sort of quantitative reasoning course for the co-requisite experience, will have that matched sort of 3+2 course experience. And similarly for our STEM-based programs, those students will be taking Math 126 or Math 126 co-requisite course. Again, Math 126 plus a 2-credit 26 experience or a 3-credit 26 experience, again, depending on the institution. Where we have had a little bit of a hiccup in terms of the time associated and the time needed to get to this 3rd pending pathway is for our business and health science students. What we found in a system-wide audit is we've got some institutions in the system who are leveraging Math 126 for business, Math 126 for health sciences, others who are using Math 124 as that gateway or co-requisite gateway course, and still others who are using Math 120 for a variety of different disciplines in these 2 very large and broad buckets of business and health sciences. And so if you tuned into the board meeting just a week or so ago, we did ask the board to consider giving us a little bit more time as a math faculty on the discipline and institutional leadership to continue this dialogue. And so in so much as fall 21, particularly for our advisors who are looking to advise students in the onboarding experience here shortly, we want you to follow your traditional pathways as you have them established at the institutional level for business and health science students, recognizing that certainly as early as the subsequent year, 2022, that they're very well, we hope to have a common pathway across the system in that regard. And then similarly for English, for the assessment of math, They've also agreed to flexible outcomes for the co-requisite course based on student needs. Again, this is just in time in the context of math. A little bit different than English, where we talked about English having more time on task with the given outcomes of the Gateway English course. For math, we know that there are some significant developmental sort of outcomes in proportion to the Gateway course experience. And that truly is a just-in-time perspective of students who may be struggling in this topic area or that topic area. So the flexibility for outcomes is necessary there. So it becomes just-in-time tailored support. They have, like English, agreed to common assessment themes overall for all the Gateway portions of the courses, which is terrific. And like English, they have agreed to meet annually to discuss the outcomes of the institutional assessment of student learning in the co-rec space for math. Theo, next slide, please. A bit of context around faculty and training and professional development. Much like the experience you all are getting for in this space around advising and enrollment enforcement and placement, our math faculty and our English faculty are having similar experiences. In fact, they're started in November. They'll continue through April as well, each month with a couple of sessions. One of the things that we noted in our audit of how we were going to have the human resources to pull this off at each institution, we did an audit on adjunct credentialing to ensure that our adjunct faculty across the institutions who were typically teaching below college level mathematics, developmental math, we wanted to make sure that they had the right academic credentials to be able to teach college level math. And one thing that we found was a little bit of a gap in that. Not in all cases, but in some cases, some of our adjunct faculty didn't have the exact right graduate level coursework or credential to be eligible from an accreditation standpoint to deliver and be the instructor of record for Gateway Mathematics. And so what our friends at UNLV graciously did through the generous support of our Strong Start to Finish partners is they developed a 18 graduate credit hour graduate certificate in secondary mathematics education. And so that is out there now. We've got a series of math faculty across the system, most notably from Great Basin College right now, enrolled in this 18 graduate credit hour math certificate program. In addition to that, and they'll be ready, of course, with that 18 graduate credit hours to be in the classroom as the instructor of record, provided they finish that certificate. In addition to that, we are training our adjunct faculty across the system and to develop and deliver the support course function of mathematics in conjunction with the full-time faculty delivering the Gateway portion of the course. So in so much as faculty could not get additional graduate certifications, we didn't want to lose them, and we certainly don't want to lose their expertise. And so they're partnering with other faculty to sort of team teach, if you will, the co-requisite course, and that's institutionally based. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the professional development for all faculty is out there around a myriad of different topic areas. If you're interested in that, you can talk with your math and English faculty representatives on the task force. Again, many thanks to NV Energy and grants from Strong Start to Finish and ECMC Foundation for pulling this off for us. So with that, Theo, I'd like to toss this to our friend, Dr. Nellie Brown, to talk about some of the advising components, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, James. So as we've heard, we've come a long way to get to this step of having an action plan, part 1 and part 2 with specific implementation processes and protocols for academic advisors to ensure consistency across the system while simultaneously being flexible to accommodate varying needs of each institution. Imagine how difficult that has been over the past couple of years that we've started on this process. The NSHE Co-Requisite Implementation Action Plan Part 2 includes a common communication toolkit, information regarding planned enrollment enforcement protocols, common credits for the co-requisite gateway classes that James was just mentioning, as well as a formidable assessment and professional development plan. And if you all have read it, then you know. So that gives you a little bit of an insight into what's in Part 2. Next slide, Theo. Now, we did get a list of everybody who is the leads on each of the different areas, but I did want to give you guys a brief overview too as we delve into the specifics for advisors. It's important for each of you to know who your advising leads are at each institution. And I want to thank each of my counterparts for thoughtful teamwork and collaboration as we sorted through the many challenges and opportunities the advancement of the co-requisite policy presented. So please take a moment to see who your advising lead is on the co-rec implementation team, and feel free to direct any questions to us, whether that's today or at any part of this implementation process. So we are definitely here for you at any part in this, whether there's questions about, I'm seeing quite a few questions about things like financial aid and, how does this work and what will this look like at my institution? And so each of us are here to help you through this process. Next slide. So the timeline of the rollout for advisors is something we thought long and hard about. As you all know, advisors need to think about changes much further in advance than people realize. We have to know what changes are coming, start marketing those changes, and prepare students for any shifts in the programs or pathways long before the changes actually take place. So starting this past fall to fall 2021, you can see where the team has worked on finalizing plans, and we're now on the verge of sending out marketing communication of this policy to students. And some of us have already been working on some level of COREC implementation at our institutions, with fall 2021 being the date for full implementation. On the top line, you have each of the COREC advising series professional development dates, which include trainings that are specific to your institution in February, followed by growing the whole student, equity and advising in March, and finally in April, lessons from NSHE math and English faculty with more specific information on what is included in these co-requisite classes. And that we believe is going to be just in time for our students who are looking at starting to register for fall classes. Next slide. So communication to academic advisors is so important. So each of you are a key piece of ensuring the co-requisite policy is successful. So you are the front line that needs to be in the know and informed every step of the way so students have the most accurate information. So your co-rec leads in your institutional task force will send updated information to you. Some documents that will assist you as we shift to co-rec implementation are the action plans, the advisor guidebook with institutional specific information. And thank you to Emily and the other leads that focused on the advising handbook, and Theo for putting that together. That was a big heavy lift as well. Attend staff meetings, advisor committees, and stay engaged in the process. And are there other individuals across your campuses that meet with students regularly? How do we make sure that those individuals are also informed? So whether they are, a regular teaching faculty, Nevada Promise mentors, recruiters, we do need to think much more broadly and widely about who meets with our students and who will need to communicate this information out. So consistency is key in the messaging. We want everybody to have that consistent message. So not just at our own institutions, but across NSHE wide. And the more people we get the word out to, the better. Next slide. So as advisors, we communicate the information we have to students. So think about what type of students you're meeting with and where that student is in the process. Does that student need a STEM pathway or liberal arts? Where does that student want to transfer to? What type of graduate program does that student think about applying to after they graduate? What about satisfactory academic progress in maintaining financial aid eligibility? These are all questions that you all already work with students on that now become even more important as the co-rec pathways are developed and implemented. So I will now hand it back to James to speak a bit more about the communication and marketing plan.
Great. Thanks, Natalie. I appreciate it. And I'll breeze through this last piece because we've touched a little bit on our communication and marketing in the interest of time. As we alluded to earlier, in the implementation action plan, we wanted to ensure that we had consistent messaging and branding as to why we're doing this, what the messaging is, how this is centered on student success, how this is focused on closing achievement gaps for students and ensuring their success. And so we do, with this incredible leadership of friends at Great Basin College and the communication team, big shout out to Morgan and Jennifer there. They have developed a co-requisite communication toolkit. I'm going to show you some of that collateral here in just a second. This collateral is designed sort of in a template mode. It has been branded not only from the NSHE COREC implementation task force branding, but also branded by institution. So it's almost a plug and play set of resources that are templated for each of our 7 institutions. This is communication with students, communication with high school personnel, counselors, and the like, communication with campus communities internally, and certainly communication outward to the outward public through things like press releases and PowerPoint templates as folks are going out into the professional space and sharing the results of some of these implementations, shared PowerPoint templates out there as well. So again, big thanks to GBC and the Strong Start to Finish friends for the grant to support the toolkit development. I'll give you, Theo, if you switch to the next slide there, I'll give you a quick overview of some of what this looks like. As you can see, as any good communication toolkit would have, there's base colors and accent colors with color codes to ensure the consistent branding. There's a snapshot there in the center of the screen around the logos that are incorporated into all the collateral. There's posters and flyers, social media messaging, and images to go with that messaging. There's a timeline for this communication as well, so we can be in sync as institutions as we're deploying messaging through social media channels, for example, that we're doing so in a rolled out and coordinated effort. And so all of these pieces of collateral, there's over 90 of them, again, are branded by institution and also ensuring the branding of the INSHE COREC Implementation Task Force. And these things will be made available to you in download fashion, and then you can tweak as necessary through your communication and comms teams. Theo, next slide. I want to end by saying a big thank you. This work could not have been done, and in no means am I under the illusion that we are done. But I'm saying to get us to this point where we actually have implementation plans and a strategic direction in place to get this off the ground for fall 21, it couldn't have been done without the collaboration from all of us, everyone on this call and the folks that are watching this later. So big shout out to the task force members. Again, a big shout out to the Board of Regents for having the courage to tackle an implementation for an entire state and providing the resources to the energy to support the institution's implementation of this work, along with our friends at ECMC Foundation, Strong Start to Finish, Student Ready Strategies, and Complete College America. Theo, I'll turn it back to you.
Excellent. At this point, we are ready to address a few questions. I know that we are a little bit longer on time, so we may defer some of the questions to our open panel in the next session as well. But Kate, is there one or two pressing questions?
Yeah, I could just get to a couple in the Q&A box. And as you said, any that we don't get to now, we can certainly, the panel can answer in the box. One question from Debbie: these students get Pell Grants that do not pay for math remediation. So is it hard to get students to take these classes? Finances are a big issue. And Natalie, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to take that one. So typically with financial aid, any classes that are required for a student's degree would be eligible for that aid. And so that would include the co-requisite classes. And so I would definitely connect with your financial aid representatives at your institution on how that's being handled. You know, one of the questions that is coming up for us is, you know, ensuring that students realize that when they are enrolling in classes that are, you know, more credits than typical 3-credit classes, how that may impact satisfactory academic progress down the road, and that could potentially impact financial aid eligibility. But you know, as far as their initial semesters enrolling in these co-requisite classes, you know, those credits will likely be covered. You know, but it again depends on the student's individual circumstances.
Another question: is there data on how offering these co-requisite courses affects the number of traditional gateway course sections that can be offered? Are the number of sections that can be offered limited, since professors are required to spend more time with students during the co-requisite component of the courses? Will this result in larger class sizes?
That's a great question. This will not result in larger class sizes. And why is because we are freeing up a lot of instructional capacity through doing away with traditional developmental education. So instructors that have previously taught many courses numbered below 100, their instructional capacity is now freed up to teach those college level courses. As James said, that was one of the concerns, was the credentialing of those faculty. Each institution is addressing those concerns. Some are participating in UNLV's newly developed program to credential those faculty, but no, we do not expect this to result in higher class sizes.
Okay. Well, we want to leave enough time to make sure everyone has another quick break before we go into the third part of our event here today. So again, we would ask everyone to stay logged into Zoom and maybe just plan to be back here a couple minutes after the top of the hour. And we also put any questions, continue to put them in the Q&A box as you have them, and our panel of experts here can answer those in the Q&A box. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We want to be mindful of your time and get going again here. We're going to have the NSHE advising leads, a panel of NSHE advising leads. It's going to be talking about lessons learned so far. And I think Jeff is going to start us off. Did we lose Jeff? Okay. Jennifer, can you share your slides? Great.
Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Perfect.
I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with Jeff because he's on as an attendee and not a panelist. So we're going to work through that for 1 second. So if everybody wants to hold on, we'll get that moving. While we're waiting for Jeff to get his other link, I'm going to answer one of these questions because I just saw this. It says using one instructor for the just-in-time component of CoREC and another instructor for the gateway component is potentially courting a lack of communication and coordination, unless the two instructors are truly a team that plans and implements in tandem. The prospect of the CoREC model collapsing back into a remedial model exists. And I completely agree with that. One thing that we've seen across the country are faculty members who are two different faculty members who are teaching CoRECs who understand that this is a really integral part of making this work. And so they've done things like create Google Docs with student codes where after every single class, they're updating notes about how the students are doing that are in the CoREC course. So they need help with this, or they've already mastered this, move on to this outcome, and really develop innovative ways of this open communication. So I think that's a really, really good point. And I appreciate that that question or that comment in our question and answer box. If anybody else has other ways that they've seen this happen, feel free to add those to the chat box.
Vanessa, I also want to take a second to answer my good friend Hank's email, Hank's message. Hank writes, can advisors see the faculty training or maybe talk to faculty to provide our perspective on how to talk to students? about academic success and time on task? And the answer to that, Hank, is absolutely yes. You will have the opportunity to talk with your English and math faculty at the later in the spring semester, and Vanessa will share those dates with everyone at the end of the presentation. But math and English faculty will be joining you all to share kind of what they envision, their math and English, their reformed math and English classrooms looking like. Additionally, your advising leads from across the system are all hosting a February advising training. And so maybe at that time, if you would like to speak with your math and English faculty, recommend that to your specific advising lead, and they may be able to bring those faculty in at that time. That's a great question. Elaine writes, are these co-requisite classes going to be available while students are still seniors in high school? And the answer to that is yes. Students, while the co-requisite policy does not require students at the dual credit level to be enrolled in a co-requisite course, institutions can continue to offer Math 95 and Math 96 to high school students. If a student is a dual credit student, they absolutely have the opportunity to enroll into the co-requisite Math 120, Math 124, or Math 126. That will certainly be an option. In the same vein as that course, I want to also just mention kind of the approach to placement for those courses. And James talked a little bit about this before, but Math 120, the co-requisite model, will have no prerequisite. So any student will be able to enroll into that course. James, if you're still able to answer a question, can you, I'm just rusty on the placement mechanisms for Math 126 as a co-requisite model. Can you confirm whether that will be an open course or have a prerequisite?
Sure, Theo. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Each institution is kind of working through that now. So I would hope that the February session will be able to address that more nuanced ways. And I say that not to kick the can down the road, but rather because I'll take UNR for example, they've got a 3+2 and a 3+3 model for Math 126 co-rec, depending on placement. And that same protocol is not in place necessarily at the other institutions. And so it hasn't been a globalized commonality in that regard.
Excellent. Thank you, James. And Dr. Purdy writes, is there data either in other states or otherwise that show the number of students enrolling in math and English after co-requisites were implemented, whether the enrollment declined or not? If so, what is the ethnic breakdown? And I can say both looking at the NSHE data of the institutions that have implemented and national data, I have yet to see an enrollment decline after co-requisite implementation. It's actually been the opposite. You see a ramping up of students enrolling into their subsequent courses. Whereas students that would normally go through a remediation model would, there may be 30% of the starting population that would reach the gateway course. You're now opening the doors wide for students to take college level courses. And so we are actually anticipating an incline in enrollment, particularly for gateway courses and those completing the gateway courses, because if you look at 100 student model, in that remedial model, maybe 30 would make it into the gateway course and 24 would pass that gateway course. In the co-requisite model, all 100 students go right into the gateway course. And if the course even has a low pass rate like 70%, then that's still 70 students that are making it on to the subsequent courses. So I will just quickly also add that my dissertation research actually looked at this and the subsequent course enrollment specifically, and found that the percentage of students, I looked at natural science course completion. So a student places into gateway versus co-requisite versus remediation, and students that place into the gateway course, into the that were enrolled in the co-requisite course versus the traditional remediation course. 11% more students went on to complete the natural science course than in the traditional remediation model. 30% more went on to complete their gateway course requirement, and 8% went on to graduate. 8% more went on to graduate. So, my study works alongside many other studies and dissertations that show very direct causal effects from co-requisite on all the positive impacts of downstream academic success. I am seeing that I think we have worked through many of our technical difficulties, and I think we are ready to go.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me and see me. This is exciting to be here with you today. My name is Jeff Forgera, and I serve as Associate Vice Provost for Student Success at UNLV. And I'm excited to be here with our esteemed panel of advising leaders from across NCHE. And we're going to talk to you about key updates and lessons learned from our community on co-rec advising, enrollment enforcement, which is I'm sure what we're all curious about and interested in as we ride these waves of change with our students, knowing that advisors are sitting in those chairs or through Zoom, talking with students about co-rec. So if someone could advance the slide, that would be great. Thank you so much. So if I could just take a minute to have my colleagues introduce themselves, we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to cover these various enrollment enforcement strategies. So we're going to talk about mandatory advising, administrative enrollment, technical enforcement, and proactive communications. And just to let you know that these are all under development and being considered across NCHE at our different institutions in different ways. So like other panelists and presenters have said, the February professional development session will allow all the advisors to hear specifically about what it's going to look like on their particular campus. But I'll go ahead and turn this over to the rest of the panel to introduce themselves.
All right, thank you, Jeff. So I will be covering the mandatory advising for first-time degree-seeking students. My name is Natalie Brown, the Executive Director for Advising and Access Services at Truckee Meadows Community College.
My name is Alex Kunkel. I'm the Director of Advising at Nevada State College, and I'll be covering technical enforcement, including drought prevention.
And my name is Jennifer Brown. I'm the Director of Advising at Great Basin College, and I am going to cover proactive communications.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. We can go ahead and advance to the next slide since I want to make sure we stay on time and get to all the great questions that are out there.
All right, so mandatory advising. A lot of the institutions out there already have in place some form of mandatory advising. As you all know, current board policy requires proactive advising for all first-time degree-seeking students, and that each student, must meet with an advisor periodically. Each college and university handles this slightly differently, but some of the areas that I think is important to stress in terms of the co-requisite policy is, what the different pathways are, what students are planning on doing downstream, how these pathways lead to success in degree programs and degree completion, math English placement protocols, placement outcomes with students, especially for those of us institutions with multiple measures, lots of different ways that students can enroll in different levels of classes, assist students in enrolling in correct math and English gateway courses based on their individual placement and selected program of study. And some of the things that we have definitely learned at TMCC is how important it is to stay in constant communication with our math and English faculty as it relates to placement policies, pathways, any changes that students may encounter as it leads to placement pathways and mandatory advising.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. So for the campuses that have the ability to do administrative enrollment, whether that's technical resources or the academic advisor staffing resources, the plan for some of us is to go ahead and administratively or block enroll our new incoming students into their first semester schedule. And that typically happens somewhere around the students' attendance, and I say attendance in air quotes, at new student orientation. So that's one way that some of the campuses are going to make sure that our advising on the co-requisite policy happens in practice. So some of these other bullet points, I'm going to go ahead and turn over to my colleague Alex at Nevada State.
Jeff, yeah. So each institution is going to do this differently depending on their technical capabilities and their own processes and policies at the institutional level. Some institutions are going to be looking at something like a drop prevention for math and English, a requirement that the student would be meeting with an advisor before they are able to drop the math or English and approval process through the advisor to allow them to do so after they've explained the implications of dropping either math or English or both. Looking at how we're addressing the new continuous enrollment policy changes that Theo spoke on earlier. Are students going to be placed in both math and English in their first semester, or are they going to be divided one or the other in that first semester based on their given major and what is best for their degree progression? Also looking for those who have the ability to use the planner feature within PeopleSoft, looking at monitoring continuous enrollment so the advisors would get updates or notifications if a student deviates from that continuous enrollment plan in both math and English. Several institutions are looking at a modification for PeopleSoft to allow students to switch freely between the co-requisite course without the requirement of department consent or the requirement to drop the course in its entirety and then sign up for a new combination section of the college level and the co-requisite support course. And then other institutions, select institutions, are also looking at enhancing the continuous enrollment policy with enforcement holds for non-compliance. So students don't adhere to those new policy requirements associated with the continuous enrollment policy. Potentially holds would be placed to get them back onto track through working with their academic advisors.
Thank you, Alex. At this point, we're going to have Jennifer jump in on proactive communication.
So yeah, we want to make sure that we are communicating this co-requisite change with our students, and we're going to do that through a variety of different ways. Referring back to the co-requisite toolkit that both James and Natalie spoke about earlier, the toolkit will consist of downloadable standard and messaging, a variety of different templates that we are able to use. So public service announcements, flyers, posters, postcards, websites, social media content, PowerPoint slides. The templates are uniquely branded for each institution, and the toolkit also includes INCHI branded logo, banner, and graphics that can be downloaded for use by institutions to begin sharing co-requisite information both internally and externally. And that would include high school guidance counselors, recruiters, parents, the general public. So we will be using a co-requisite toolkit to share this information out, so that each institution can share this information out. Furthermore, our testing centers will also have knowledge of this, so they can share co-requisite information with students, as well as our mandatory advising sessions. That's going to be a huge area where we are sharing this information with students and helping them to understand, ultimately helping them understand the different pathways and how co-requisite will help them, achieve graduation. Also, we will be doing the professional advising development series for advisors. So everyone should have been sent a flyer. And if they have not, get a hold of your advising task force lead But there will be opportunities, including this one, that will provide advisors with more information and with the most up-to-date information about Corequisite. Also, there is the advising handbook that was spoken about by several of our other presenters. They worked on the guidebook. It is tailored for each one of the institutions. It'll assist advisors with knowing the whys, the impacts, the resources available, and when helping students. So if they haven't already, the advising leads at each campus will be sharing the guidebooks with their respective campuses. Also, we will be proactive in communications. The institution should be responsible for communicating with faculty, staff, students regarding Corequisite through a variety of different modalities, including email, meetings, training, social media, websites, etc.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, Alex, and Natalie. I know we went through that really quick, but again, like we've been saying, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just to get all of us in the advising community up to like a baseline understanding of Corequisite implementation and what it's going to look like. But before we get on to questions, I just want to thank all the advisors for being here today. We have over 200 folks in today's session, which is really exciting. And we realize this is a complex change to navigate with remote learning and our staffing limitations and just general uncertainty that we're all facing as a world and a society. So we really appreciate your engagement and know that there's more to come. And we really, believe that what we've learned today is going to help us really support Nevada's future by helping our students, all of our students, reach their educational and personal goals. And like we started with student-ready strategies, our goal as institutions, and I love it, is to become student-ready organizations. So regardless of who walks in the door or who comes to our campus virtually, that we have structures and resources that can support their growth and development towards their goals. So more information to come in 2021, and we'll go ahead and get to the Q&A at this point.
All right, thank you all. I think we have one question in the Q&A box right now, and if other folks have questions, please put them there. Admissions has a competing goal of lifting holds so students can enroll. If we are competing with admissions, who is going to win?
Well, I mean, I'll go ahead and take that one. I think that's something that we've all talked about quite a bit. I think that's partly where it's important to understand the success strategies involved for students who are enrolling in their co-requisite classes and removing some of those barriers as far as enrollment enforcement may lead to those students not eventually achieving degree attainment down the road. And so it is a constant conversation between our enrollment management leadership teams, as well as academic advisors, and as advisors, making sure that we understand what all of the options are for students and that they understand what the importance of enrolling in these classes are. And so a lot of those enforcement strategies is really to get students to have that conversation with an academic advisor so that they understand and see that by enrolling in these classes, their degree attainment is more likely to be achieved down the road. And so having that information, having all of those options available, I think is one of those strategies. But I think it's going to continually be a push-pull.
A question that we got in registration, is there any flexibility for students if the advisor believes it is not the best time to take math?
I can kind of touch on that a little bit, just looking at administrative enrollment and technical enforcement. We've expanded the continuous enrollment policy to allow for students to take that course within the first year. However, at each institution, the advisors, as well as those who are looking to adhere to the INSHE policy, have to determine what exceptions or limitations may be present for the student that would allow for them delaying math or English for a given reason. Some institutions are looking at enforcing the policy through a hold and a petition process to give the student the ability to provide justification for why they want to delay their math and English, but that's being done at an institution by institution level. And so it would be on the administration at that institution to determine what process or policy is going to be in place at your institution.
Question in the Q&A box, does NSHE plan to enforce placement measures, instruments, validation at institutions, and if yes, how?
Well, you know, that's actually been established at each institution, and each institution has been working together to create different placement protocols and strategies that you'll see in the advisor handbook. And so it's not something that's being top down mandated, but it's something that each of the institutions are really working with their math and English faculty, advising counterparts, admissions, testing to really establish what placement protocols look for that institution. Does anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Natalie, I'll just add that NSHE as a system is not forcing any one type of enrollment enforcement measure. We are, however, structuring the conversation so that there are enrollment enforcement measures in place. That is a requirement. How the institution arrives at those enforcement measures is completely up to them. For example, an institution like UNLV that has a really beautiful modification in PeopleSoft to allow for certain technical variations looks a lot different than implementation at Great Basin College, where the community is a little bit smaller and they're not as well staffed. We are steadfast in a commitment to enrollment enforcement, but how the institutions arrive at that is up to them.
I would also add, just to jump in, just to kind of take us back to where we started, but this is really, like most advising, a conversation with our students. And I think it's important to kind of promote the milestone of completing co-requisite or gateway math and English in the first year and really celebrate it with our students and be in that role of talking about the benefits of that. But of course, there's always going to be students, because of life circumstances and just kind of where they are, that are going to need some compassion and empathy, and giving, you know, because NSHE has given the institutions autonomy with enrollment enforcement, that's where those individual conversations between advisors and students and enrollment management, financial aid, all those offices have to come together and make the decision that is in the best interest of the student, but also keeping in mind the goals and the outcomes of the policy and what we're going to be evaluated against. So we've started to have some of these conversations on my campus about what do we do with non-compliance? You know, I mean, you know, how rigorous are we going to get? But I mean, I think the best message is we need to look at the data. We need to see which students, you know, have yet to complete those courses in the first year, and then doing that individual outreach and putting some strategies in place to kind of get them back into the fold.
So just looking at some conversation here in the chat box or in the Q&A, I'm concerned that eliminating stop out points and remediation, that we have created a more high stakes situation with potentially 8 to 10 credits of co-rec English and math for those students who struggle the most. If students can't pass something and this delays their progress through the classes, is this something that the Board of Regents has considered or is discussing?
You know, I don't know if you want to take that from like the board's perspective or from NSHE's perspective. But looking at it from, I mean, just in general, I mean, I think we have to be careful not to put our assumptions on what's happening and think that that's what's happening with students, right? That eliminating stop out points and remediation will create a more high stakes situation. I think that with the NSHE policy allowing for taking English and math over the first year, not necessarily together in the first semester if they need some support in both courses, allow students to spread those out if that's the way it falls out. And if they're concerned about that, I think that's something you absolutely can help them with. And I don't think, I've not seen any evidence that students taking 2 co-recs in the same semester is hindering progress. It's getting their gateway math and English out of the way together. And if they're not passing it, then there are mechanisms in place for that. But I'm gonna give it to Theo to see if the Board of Regents has a point of view on that.
Yeah, just to echo, I mean, Vanessa is directly in line with kind of the perspective that the board has taken. And this is exactly why we have requested from the board that flexibility to do a co-rec in the first semester and a co-rec in the second semester. Because we didn't, for students that, particularly that are part-timers, see it's 75% of CSN's population, we didn't want those first 12 credits or so to just be, co-requisite math or English or 9 credits. We wanted them to, progress onto one of the co-recs and take a course of interest, and then move on to the next semester and take the other co-requisite and a course of interest. So I think your question is spot on, and it is exactly why we've sought a revision and received a revision, so that you all, as resident experts in your students' experiences, can determine if multiple co-requisites in the same semester is the right decision for that student, or if starting with 1 co-rec in the first semester and moving to the second co-rec in the second semester is the right decision for them. Advising team, is there anything that you want to add?
Well, I think this, to add to that and kind of get to some of the questions about, students who may have high enough ACT, SAT to place directly into gateway classes, but lack the confidence, even some of these other questions about, where do students need to, what class should they be placed into? How do they get placed into that? And I think that's definitely where it's so important that we have all of these academic advisors on the call today, that it really is that one-on-one conversation that you all have with a student. How many Nakata peeps do I have out there? Finish that sentence in the chat. I advise, and anybody? Yes, thank you, Tara, Stacy. I advise and you decide. And, that's something that we really strongly support at Truckee Meadows Community College, as I know my panelists do at the other institutions as well, that, it's really through that conversation that we have with a student to say, hey, where are you at in your journey? What class is going to be the most beneficial for you right now? Is it both math and English co-rec? Is it one or the other? What's your degree plan? What's your goal? And how can we get you there? And so, whether that's they place into the gateway class without the co-rec support or not, that's that one-on-one conversation, and why it's so important that the board policy has in place that students must meet with an academic advisor.
Looking at the chat box now, is NSHE looking at addressing how this may impact out-of-state students? Theo, do you want to address that one? Is there an impact to out-of-state students here?
Yeah, historically, students haven't been able to at least transfer to the four-year institutions without completing or being eligible to enroll into the college level gateway course. So for students transferring to one of the four-year institutions, I'm not seeing co-requisite have a major impact. And I think I would need a little bit more information on how it would impact our community college students. Unless Natalie, Jeff, Alex, or Jennifer, you have thoughts on how this, I'm not able to see how in this moment, how it might affect our transfer students at the two-year level.
Well, I think I'll just jump in. I mean, I think this is really the articulation question, and how do out-of-state students transferring into NSHE institutions how do they show that they've fulfilled the gateway or co-rec requirement? And I think each of our campuses have, their own articulation structure in place that will need to be looked at, and we'll need to have a process that's clear and consistent and transparent for our incoming out-of-state students. I'm sure my other colleagues have thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. It's really going to be a very similar process that we've always had in place for students transferring in credits, is looking at what credits they've transferred in, where it's from, what the content of the coursework is, what that looks like, and what it would articulate into. And a lot of that also goes back to conversations with our math and English faculty, if it's a new class that we've never seen, and how it may or may not articulate into what we currently have. And, as far as those students who, are placed then directly into a co-rec class with, whether that's with support or without, I think it's going to benefit all of those students down the road, just because they can complete those classes quite a bit faster than, maybe not being able to transfer in any of the remedial coursework that they may have been transferring in previously and starting all over again based on an AccuPlacer score or some other testing. So I think ultimately it could also benefit those students who are transferring in as well.
Another question, Hank says, looking at all the data on co-requisites, is there anything on student intersectionality of their multiple identities, non-traditional, working while going to class, first gen, working in hospitality or another industry, etc.?
I'm going to actually ask our Student Ready Strategies team if you've seen any data across the nation. Within the system, we have looked at those not as really an intersectionality perspective. So when we've done the data disaggregation, it's just been that disaggregated data by females or by his ethnicity. I will say that in my dissertation work on co-rec, I did look at intersectionality. For example, if Black female students performed differently, and unfortunately, when you looked at the intersectionality, the data was not statistically significant. So that's anecdotally what I have. Vanessa, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I think that's what's really hard about education research is when you're looking at state data systems and the way institutions report to states, and then states report to larger reporting bodies, whether that be like the post-secondary data partnership, the clearinghouse, running any kind of analysis on intersectionality is extremely difficult. A lot of that's not collected in a way that makes it analysis friendly, we'll say that. And so there isn't a lot out there about intersectionality. So there is a hole in the research, and I think it would be great, Hank, if you would take up that mantle and run some of that data at your own institution.
Okay, just checking the chat box here. Debbie says many AA transfer students take a stats class instead of math and come to UNLV without math placement. Anybody want to address that?
I'll just jump in quickly, and if some of our math faculty were here, they would share this, but just like there's further discussion going on about the college algebra pathway for business and health sciences students, there's been some discussion about statistics also, and do we need a pathway for statistics? So it's pending, Debbie. We know it's out there. So I think as the math, I think NC has already established the curriculum committee in Gateway Math, and I'm sure statistics will be on the agenda of that group.
Well, I appreciate everyone so much. It's been great questions, great answers. And as I said, we'll continue checking the Q&A box, and we can send some answers independently from our panelists as they want to answer those. I know we have some closing thoughts and some closing information, and I think Vanessa is going to provide that information.
Hello. Yeah. My slide was actually in the other presentation. So if Jennifer, could you pull that back up and go to the slide that has the sort of the grid of the events on it?
Yes, my apologies. Give me
That's
one
okay. No
second.
worries. No worries. So while she's pulling that up, what I want to say is I think that today your questions have shown how interested you are in this reform, how much this does affect your day-to-day work, and how absolutely integral you are to making the co-requisite approach across the whole state of Nevada work. And so I applaud you for all of your critical thinking about this and noticing what's going on with your students. I encourage you to start thinking about things like what Hank brought up. What kind of data can you look at to see what's helping your students be successful? Or, you know, on average, we have about 30% of students who don't make it through a gateway course with a co-requisite. Why is that? How can you help figure that out at your institution? So keep asking those questions. We are, again, so pleased to be here supporting this. This is what's coming up next in your co-requisite Math and English professional development series. In February, this is something that's going to be institution specific. So for all of you on this call, you will have individual meetings with your team at your institution. The time and the day will be chosen by the folks at your institution, and that's taking place in February. So you will get notification of that from them. And then after that, on March 12th, from 10 a.m. to noon, we're going to be doing an equity and advising session. So everything will be geared on creating equitable outcomes for students through the co-requisite approach and talking about your role in doing that as an advisor. And then April 9th from 10 to noon, we'll be doing a deeper dive in co-requisite Math and English courses. What do they actually look like in Nevada at your institutions? So we started broad. We're going to get very, very narrow as these professional development events take place. And so we're looking forward to it. After today, what you will get, I believe from Theo Meek, is you'll get a recording of this webinar. You will get slides of the session, so you'll be able to look at all of these, and you're going to get a link to an evaluation. So please fill that out so we can make all the rest of the experiences better and better. And then I think that's it. We will, Student Ready Strategies, we'll see you in March. I think there are some other questions in the chat box. Theo, if you want to stay on and address some of those, feel free to do that. And otherwise, thank you all so much.
While people are taking off, we have a question from Stacy who asks about professional development opportunities for math and English faculty, as well as other associated colleagues like registrars and the like. Math and English faculty are receiving very robust training. We have approximately 20 different professional development activities scheduled for math and English, ranging from growth mindset, asset and debt versus deficit mindedness, back mapping, curriculum. I mean, there is a slew evaluations and assessment. Your math and English faculty have requested a number of different training opportunities. So yes, they are receiving a lot of training, and your math and English colleagues will know that information very intimately. The other folks, such as registrars and admissions, we being from NSHE, do not have scheduled professional development activities for them. Each institution has an institution-wide implementation task force in which, if there are substantive topics that are being brought up, your representatives can share that with the NSHE group. But to date, they have not requested PD, professional development necessarily, but they have requested opportunities in which they can all work together. And they are doing that. Actually, your financial aid directors just met yesterday or the day before to talk, and I believe co-requisite was an item that they wanted to talk about. Your registrars are meeting periodically, and Corequisite has been one of the key topics that they all have talked about. So there are a number of different conversations on CoRec happening across the really the entire higher education support spectrum. So Stacy, your follow-up. So if my faculty in the College of Fine Arts would like some opportunities to know more about this change and how it may impact our majors, what suggestions do you have for trainings? My first suggestion would be to have those faculty reach out to the individuals that we have listed. And Jennifer, if you want to unshare your screen, I will leave up the contact list so that you all can reach out. Your math and English faculty, I believe, would be more than happy. I don't want to volunteer them, but I believe that they'd be more than happy to provide department-specific trainings. Additionally, they are having a number of conversations with their downstream disciplines on how this change really impacts those disciplines. And here is that task force list. Uche, I see that you asked, in California, placement measures and instrument validation is mandated by the Chancellor's office and takes place every 2 to 3 years. Some NCHE institutions may not do this by themselves without an NCHE policy. Yes, that is absolutely correct. We at the system office have had a conversation with math and English faculty about assessment. Unfortunately, not specific to the assessment of multiple measures practices. But your math and English faculty have committed to assessing the entire co-requisite experience, at least in the immediate future, yearly with each other, and providing continuous development. So as we move forward into those trainings, we will ensure that multiple measures and placement instrument validations are certainly something that those faculty look at. Bill Spear, thank you for the comments. You are one of my favorite people on this planet, and your response to why Sarah's gardening failed being 2020 is absolutely hysterical and could not be more accurate.
You said pet your dog. I love that.
Yes. If y'all haven't noticed, my dog is snoring in the background. That's why I've had to go on mute a number of times.
I saw his paws were twitching, and I was wondering what he was dreaming about.
You know, he's a runner at night. It's the only time he exercises, pretty much. And early on when I got him, he would sleep in the bed, and he could no longer because I would wake up with like scratches because he'd be running in the middle of the night. We still have a number of attendees. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Chances are you are not the only individual that has that question, so I will stay on for as long as it takes to answer everyone's questions.
We've also been answering several of them by typing out the answer in the Q&A box. So if you haven't been monitoring that yourself and you want to go review some of those questions and answers, that's something else we can do in the few minutes we have remaining.
Okay, we are going to go ahead and wrap up. If you have any follow-up questions, you have my contact information as well as the contact information of your academic advising leads. So please feel free to contact them. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your Friday and have a great weekend. And if we don't talk to you, happy holidays.